Two statues of queens toppled in Manitoba legislative. Protesters tossed statue of explorer James Cook into Victoria Harbour. Catholic churches vandalized and Anglican churches burned. This is the Great White North Report. So two statues of queens on the grounds of the Manitoba legislature were pulled down Thursday during a rally aimed at replacing Canada Day celebrations with actions and memories of hundreds of Indigenous children buried in unmarked graves at the residential schools across the country. Dozens of people, many wearing orange shirts, sent to the residential schools surrounding Queen Victoria statue. Some of them wrapped it in ropes and pulled it off its base. You know, you see a picture here of all these police officers. What the hell are they doing? As soon as I saw ropes go up, I would have definitely got in there. The police should have got in there. Now, the grounds were the destination of every Child Matters walk in Winnipeg on Canada Day afternoon to protest the fallout of Canada's residential school system. Red paint handprints and a sign saying "Wherever children once, bring them home" was left leaning on the pedestal. So why'd they target Queen Victoria? Well, other than the colonial imperial symbol that she is, she was the monarch at the time Canada entered Confederation, and she would have had to give her royal consent. Like, it's her fault that Canada negotiated treaties with the Indigenous people and enacted its residential school policy. So then they went and they also tore down the statue of Queen Elizabeth on the east side of legislative grounds. I am not in favor of any acts of vandalism like this, especially on Canada Day. I'm a proud Canadian. Every country has done terrible things in its past, and for Canada, this is probably one of its worst. This was the worst thing we've ever done as a country, and that we've been slowly healing from it. And then you got a couple of nuts out there who want to bring it up and divide the country, because this topic is now very divisive. Where was the outrage years ago? So then we go over to BC, and they've done the same thing. Protesters tore down the statue of explorer James Cook and tossed him into Victoria Harbour, as well as a totem pole was later burned. They also did the same thing to a George Vancouver statue. I believe one of them was caught on video by a guy on a boat. So I hope the police catch these people and prosecute them. Send them to jail with a big beefy Hells Angel guy, and let them find out how well they can get a passport or a federal job when you have a criminal record. Then it goes on to say that 10 Catholic churches in Calgary were vandalized with orange-red paint. I understand the anger towards Catholic churches because the Catholic Church, because they were the ones who ran the schools mostly, and they've been pretty silent about the whole idea. They haven't apologized officially. I'm not sure in this day and age how good an apology would be. The far left doesn't care. Now they want to charge the police. Our lives matter. First of all, most of these priests are probably long since dead, the ones who ran the residential schools. Then we got fire destroying Anglican Church in New Hazelton and damages another. So why all the anger all of a sudden? Because the Indigenous people are finally going to these residential school sites and using radar ground penetration equipment to look for graves. They found a large number in Kamloops in a mass grave, which tells me that's probably a plague or some kind of disease that ravaged it, as well as more in Saskatchewan that were unmarked. Not unknown, unmarked. And now they're finding 182 unmarked graves near another residential school in BC's interior. You gotta remember, depends on the timeline when these kids were buried. Like, it's a tragedy. I'm not denying that. I feel really bad for these kids, what happened. But unmarked doesn't mean unknown necessarily, because there could have been a wooden marker that deteriorated. Cut stone could be refurbished. There's a Pioneer Cemetery in my hometown. It's unmarked. The stone was reused for something else. But what they're trying to do is pressure for a papal apology for the Catholic Church role in residential schools because of all these discoveries. And I'm going to tell you right now that, I don't know, the anger today is, why wasn't that anger there 50 years ago when the residential schools were handed over? The First Nations, Indigenous people have had that long, 50 years, to go look at these residential schools and find out what's in the ground and go and try and get the records. So that brought about a lot of criticism for the past Canada Day celebrations, growing in the wake of these burial sites being found. Now, I understand why a lot of First Nations and municipalities in places like BC are opting not to mark the occasion at all. It was a tragedy. It should never have happened, but it was the mistake of a young country racked by 2 rebellions looking to pacify the West. And this is what they opted for. And the fact that we let it go for so long, you know, the residential schools were handed back to the Indigenous people back in the 1960s, and the final one closed the door in 1996. So, you know, depending on how you look at it, it's 80 to 100 years. So I can understand why Canada Day would be muted in some communities. Completely understandable. My community, it was business as usual. A lot of fireworks, wasn't any parades or anything, but that's also a pandemic. The last two Canada Days have been a downer. But Canada has come a long way since the start of the Indian Act and residential school pilot. We've come a long way, and we're a much better country now than we were back then. So is Canada Day set for another brawl over cancel culture? No, I'm never in favor of cancel culture. Tearing down our leaders and heroes of the past is not the way to do it. Far left social justice warrior nuts are a minority, but for some reason the Trudeau government is allowing them to flourish, and the media gives them coverage. And for me, Canada Day is a proud moment. A lot of people want to come to Canada, so it's not that bad of a place. There are worse places out there, and let's face it, Canada was a colony. We do have a colonial past, we have an imperial past, and you can't change that. Canceling all the symbolism of it is not going to change anything. Without colonialism and imperialism, there is no Canada. Pure and simple. Tearing down our heroes and our leaders is not. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna put up instead? Probably a statue of the Kardashians. Jesus. So now they got our colonial history, the colonial agenda in Bill C-15. I'm not sure what it is, but this writer says it's all smoke and mirrors. They want to dismantle our colonial institutions or imperial institutions. They're not perfect, but they're better than a lot of institutions out there. I think we're heading. The far left, social justice warrior nuts want us to head into a Chinese-style cultural revolution, which would be a terrible mistake. And we should be teaching our colonial history in the good, the bad, and the ugly that it had. It wasn't perfect, but again, Canada was shaped by our colonial past. If there's no colonialism in the Americas, then there wouldn't be no Canada. No imperialism in Canada, then we would become part of the United States. Think about it like that. And you gotta remember, this has been going on for a long time. Like, Prime Minister Harper actually apologized in the House of Commons towards the residential school policy back in 2008. And here we are still talking about it today. It's been 13 years. And it might get worse, because if they go through they should be going through every residential school right now and digging up the grounds and finding out what's there. I'm going to tell you right now, there's going to be a lot more found. And why these weren't found way back in 2008, 2000, 1985, 1950. We know they're there. We just don't know how many. And it's time to go through the records and find out. Go through the records, dig on the ground, find out exactly. And we've already paid compensation to a lot of the students, the survivors of these residential schools. That started under Harper and has continued under Trudeau. And depending on the circumstances, most of them will get the minimum $10,000. Now, I know you can't put a price tag on suffering. Throwing money at the problem is not the way to do it. But that seems to be the government response. So in 2008, some 80,000 former federal residential school students received $1.6 billion in compensation. An additional $3 billion has been paid to resolve claims of sexual abuse, serious physical abuse, and other wrongful acts that have caused serious psychological harm to former students. So the federal government is making payouts. Many Canadians are aware of the tragic legacy of the Indian residential schools, but a lot did not know, and most Canadians still do not know, that beginning in the 20s, 200,000 students attended federally operated Indian day schools. Now, I don't know how Canadians cannot know about that, because I learned about it in grade 8, grade 10, and grade 12, grade 13, OAC in history class. These Canadians were probably playing pocket pool or diddling themselves during class. We've known about it, we just never brought it up to the forefront. And people saying they didn't know is ridiculous. You can look online and find anything. So what can we do realistically? Like, let's look at the realistic issue here. Is this going to happen again? Probably. Because people are going to react, do knee-jerk reactions, and get all upset when they should have already known by now. My solution is a Vietnam memorial type monument in Ottawa. Set it up, go through all our records, go through all the residential school grounds and nearby cemeteries, find out and try and identify as many of these kids as possible, put their names on this wall. Also, any unknowns, find out how old they were when they died, what was are they male or female, era they're from, so are they from the 1920s? Like, they can find that stuff out with forensic science. Put a date on them. Either give them a name or put unknown and put the dates on. Do that for every kid you can find on this wall in Ottawa. Then at the provincial level, do it for those kids who died in that province or territory. Same idea, same kind of monument. Then do the same thing at the residential school for any kids at that residential school who died there. Make it into a field trip for kids so they never forget. That's the idea, to never forget. Cancel culture is a way to make you forget, to get rid of. And that's not the way to do it. Toppling statues is not a way to erase our past. Because we erase our past, then we'll make the same mistakes later down the road. When we put up statues, we're celebrating someone famous who was at the top of the world at the time. But we can also do the same thing, put up monuments to our biggest failures too. Educate the next generation. And as for Canada Day should still be a celebration because it could have went differently. Founding fathers had a vision. It wasn't perfect, but at least it was something they were thinking ahead, thinking to something grander. Anyway, any Canadians out there, let me know how the Canada Day celebrations went in your part of the woods and what you think of what's going on with the cancel culture. Are you in favor of it? And leave comments below in the comment section. Until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.